Yet even within that uncertainty, remembrance has taken on a different kind of strength. Without clear resolution, memory becomes the place where meaning is carefully preserved, held not in verdicts or conclusions, but in stories shared quietly among those who loved her. Photographs, familiar routines, and the smallest personal details grow more significant over time, forming a fragile but enduring connection between what was and what remains. For many families living with unanswered loss, healing does not follow a straight path. It unfolds in moments of acceptance beside moments of renewed grief, in the slow learning of how to live alongside questions that may never be resolved. What endures, however, is love's persistence, the refusal to let a life be reduced to mystery alone. Through remembrance, advocacy, and the simple act of speaking her name, they continue to affirm that her story is more than the uncertainty surrounding its end. And in that quiet affirmation lies a different form of closure, not the closing of a case, but the steady honoring of a life. Though answers may remain distant, care does not. Memory does not. And in the gentle determination to keep both alive, her presence continues to shape the world in ways silence never could. They speak of milestones that now exist only in imagination, projects she might have completed, places she hoped to see, friendships and love that would have continued to grow alongside her. These possibilities linger like unwritten chapters, reminding everyone who knew her how much of the future can rest within a single life. The sorrow is not only for what ended, but for everything that was still becoming. Yet in remembering her spirit, friends also find something that endures beyond loss. Her determination, her creative energy, and the kindness she offered in ordinary moments continue to influence the way they move through their own lives. Some pursue dreams with greater courage because she once encouraged them to try. Others choose patience and loyalty because that is what she showed so naturally. In this way, the future she was denied quietly reshapes the futures still unfolding around her. Grief remains woven through these memories, but so does gratitude, for laughter shared, for hope once spoken aloud, for the simple gift of having known her at all. And within that mingling of sorrow and thankfulness, her presence persists, not as a story frozen in tragedy, but as a living echo carried forward by those who refuse to let her light fade. For investigators, such cases often linger long after files are archived, carried quietly as reminders of the limits within even the most determined pursuit of truth. Every unresolved detail becomes a question that resists silence, urging continued reflection on what might have been missed, misunderstood, or simply impossible to prove. The passage of time may cool public attention, yet for those who worked the case, and for those who loved her, the search for clarity rarely fades. These moments also expose the delicate balance within justice itself. Legal systems are built to demand certainty before assigning responsibility, a safeguard meant to protect the innocent. But when certainty remains just beyond reach, that same safeguard can feel like distance rather than protection. Families are left navigating a space between suspicion and proof, where emotional truth exists without the legal language to affirm it. Still, unresolved does not mean forgotten. Cold cases continue to invite new eyes, advancing technology, and the persistent hope that one overlooked fragment might one day shift the balance toward answers. Until then, remembrance becomes its own form of witness, holding space for truth, honoring a life interrupted, and refusing to let silence be mistaken for peace. It is a tension that resists simple answers. A justice system strong enough to guard against wrongful conviction must demand certainty, yet that same demand can deepen the pain of families who live without acknowledgement or closure. In these moments, the law's caution, necessary in principle, can feel profoundly personal in consequence, shaping grief in ways no statute fully anticipates. Discussions around cases like Juliana's often move beyond a single investigation and toward broader questions. How evidence is gathered, how emerging technology might reopen stalled paths, and how legal frameworks can support victims' families even when prosecutions are not possible. While reforms cannot rewrite the past, they reflect an ongoing effort to narrow the distance between truth, proof, and justice. For those who remember her, however, these debates remain secondary to something more human. What endures is the insistence that her life mattered, that uncertainty does not erase meaning, and that remembrance itself can be a quiet form of accountability. In holding on to that truth, loved ones continue to seek not only answers, but a world where fewer families must live with questions that never fully resolve. Some days arrive with a softness that almost feels like peace, while others reopen the absence with startling clarity. A familiar song, a passing memory, or the sight of someone her age can return them instantly to moments they wish had unfolded differently. In this rhythm of remembering and enduring, they have come to understand grief not as something to overcome, but as something to carry with tenderness. They speak often of love as the thread that remains unbroken. Though time continues forward, their connection to her stays present, in stories repeated at the dinner table, in photographs carefully kept, in quiet conversations held when the world grows still. These small rituals do not remove the pain, yet they protect what matters most: the certainty that she is remembered not for how she was lost, but for how deeply she was loved. And within that enduring love lies a quiet resilience. Life, even altered, continues to ask for movement, for moments of laughter, for new memories formed beside old ones, for the courage to keep living while honoring what cannot return. In choosing that path each day, they shape a form of healing that is gentle, unfinished, and profoundly human. Each canvas becomes a quiet conversation between memory and longing, a place where what cannot be spoken can still be felt. In the layering of paint and the rhythm of repeated strokes, grief finds motion instead of silence. Viewers may see color and form, but for her, every shade carries a moment, every texture holds a memory, and every finished piece keeps connection from fading. Over time, these works begin to speak not only of loss, but of endurance. They reveal how creativity can transform sorrow into something that reaches beyond the self, offering recognition to others who carry unseen pain, and reminding them they are not alone in their remembering. What began as a private act of survival slowly becomes a shared language of healing. In this way, Juliana's presence lingers within the art itself, not confined to the past, but moving forward through expression, emotion, and the quiet courage required to keep creating. And with every new painting, love takes another form, visible, lasting, and gently refusing to disappear. His efforts are rarely dramatic, yet they carry a steady determination, the kind built from love that has nowhere else to go. In speaking her name, revisiting unanswered questions, and urging others not to forget, he transforms private grief into something outward-facing. Advocacy becomes not only a search for answers, but a way to protect her story from being reduced to time or distance. Those who watch his persistence often recognize a deeper truth within it, that love can continue as action. Even without resolution, the act of remembering aloud challenges silence and keeps the possibility of justice alive. Each conversation, each appeal for attention, becomes another quiet statement that her life still matters in the present, not only in memory. And in that refusal to let meaning disappear, something enduring takes shape. Remembrance becomes movement rather than stillness, an ongoing promise that loss will be met with voice, care, and the courage to keep seeking light where certainty has yet to arrive. Time, in these moments, feels divided into two separate currents, one that carries the world forward, and another that circles endlessly around a single absence. Families learn to exist between those currents, participating in daily life while quietly holding a past that never fully releases them. The contrast can be isolating, as ordinary conversations continue around a loss that still feels immediate. Yet even when public attention fades, remembrance does not depend on headlines. It survives in routines, in anniversaries marked with care, in the simple act of speaking a name so it will not be forgotten. Communities may grow quieter, but within families the memory remains vivid, shaped by love rather than time, and sustained by the hope that silence is never the final chapter. In this endurance lies a quiet form of witness. To keep remembering is to affirm that a life mattered, regardless of whether answers arrive. And in that steady refusal to forget, families hold open a space where truth, justice, and healing are still possible, even if they remain just beyond reach. And within that shaping of the future lies a quieter form of purpose. When people listen closely to stories marked by loss, they begin to notice the fragile places in their own communities, the moments where attention, protection, or compassion might make a difference. What begins as sorrow can slowly widen into responsibility, urging individuals and institutions alike to respond with greater care. These conversations do not erase what happened, yet they prevent silence from settling too comfortably. They ask difficult questions about how people are supported, how warnings are recognized, and how justice can be strengthened for those who might otherwise be overlooked. In doing so, memory becomes more than reflection. It becomes guidance aimed toward prevention and dignity. And so the story's influence extends beyond its unanswered ending. It lives in heightened awareness, in policies reconsidered, in ordinary people choosing to look out for one another with deeper intention. Though the past cannot be rewritten, the future remains open, and within that openness rests the quiet hope that remembrance can still lead to protection, care, and change. Those ripples move outward in ways that are often invisible to anyone outside the circle of loss. Friends reconsider old conversations. Families measure time differently. Communities carry a quiet awareness that safety, once assumed, is never guaranteed. What appears to be a single event becomes, in truth, a long unfolding of emotional consequences shared by many. When listeners look beyond the mystery, they begin to see the deeper responsibility such stories carry. They are not only puzzles to solve, but lives to honor, reminders to treat one another with greater care, to notice vulnerability before it becomes danger, and to hold empathy at the center of attention. In this shift of perspective, fascination gives way to understanding. And through that understanding, remembrance finds its most meaningful purpose. Not in the details that remain uncertain, but in the compassion that grows from telling the story with care. In choosing to see the humanity first, audiences help ensure that what endures is not the darkness of the crime, but the quiet insistence that every life touched by it still matters. And within that journey, something deeply human continues to unfold. The act of seeking, of asking questions, holding memories close, and speaking names that might otherwise fade, becomes its own quiet affirmation of dignity. Even without resolution, this persistence resists the erasure that time can bring, insisting that meaning does not depend solely on answers. In this way, justice expands beyond institutions and into the everyday conscience of those who remember. It lives in careful storytelling, in empathy offered to the grieving, in the shared refusal to treat loss as ordinary. Each remembrance becomes a small stand against indifference, a reminder that compassion itself can carry moral weight. And so the search does not end in uncertainty alone. It settles into a steady form of hope, one grounded not in guaranteed outcomes, but in the enduring belief that truth matters, that lives matter, and that the human spirit continues to reach toward understanding even when the path remains unfinished. And in following that faint light, people often discover that resilience is rarely loud or dramatic. It is found in ordinary mornings that continue despite sorrow, in conversations that make space for both tears and laughter, in the quiet decision to keep caring even when the world feels uncertain. These small continuations become proof that dignity can survive even the deepest fracture. Memory, carried gently rather than desperately, begins to change its shape. What once felt only like pain slowly gathers warmth, stories told with tenderness, photographs held with gratitude, names spoken with love instead of only longing. In this transformation, the past is not erased, but woven into a life that still moves forward. And so hope remains, not as a promise of answers, but as a steady companion along an unfinished road. It asks for patience, for empathy, for the courage to believe that kindness still matters. And in that belief, quiet, persistent, and shared, the light endures, guiding each step toward a future where remembrance and compassion continue to walk side by side. And in that insistence, remembrance becomes something tender yet enduring. Her name is no longer held only in sorrow, but in the quiet reverence of those who continue to carry her story forward. Each time it is spoken with care, it restores a fragment of the humanity that tragedy tried to overshadow, returning focus to the life she lived rather than the way it ended. For those who loved her, memory becomes a living space where connection still breathes. They recall laughter, small kindnesses, and the ordinary moments that now feel sacred in their simplicity. These recollections do not erase grief, but they soften its edges, allowing love to remain visible alongside loss. In this balance, her presence endures, not as absence alone, but as influence still shaping hearts and choices. And so her name settles into something lasting. A quiet symbol of dreams once bright, of love still active, of meaning that refuses to fade with time. In remembering her this way, the final truth is not tragedy, but the enduring power of a life that continues to matter. And in that soft continuation, remembrance becomes less an ending than a quiet beginning. What is carried forward is not only sorrow, but the tenderness that grew around it, the patience learned through grief, the empathy awakened by absence, the deeper awareness of how precious ordinary moments truly are. These unseen changes shape the way people move through the world, turning memory into guidance rather than weight alone. Love, when held this way, does not remain fixed in the past. It becomes something active, expressed in kindness offered freely, in protection given without hesitation, in the simple courage to care in a world that can feel uncertain. Through these living gestures, her presence is not confined to memory but continues as influence, quiet yet unmistakable. And within that softened understanding, something quietly transformative takes root. People begin to move through their days with a little more gentleness, a little more patience for struggles they cannot see. Ordinary encounters, once hurried or unnoticed, gain a quiet depth, shaped by the awareness that every life carries unseen stories, fragile hopes, and the need to be treated with care. In this way, remembrance becomes less about looking back and more about shaping how we live forward. Compassion offered in passing, kindness chosen in difficulty, attention given where it might once have been withheld. These small decisions form a living continuation of meaning. They ask for no recognition, yet they ripple outward, touching lives in ways impossible to me.